The flagship Lumenvesk drifted through the violet currents of the Hellion Reach like a cathedral made of light. 2 kilometers of pearl-white hull, threaded with veins of bioluminescent coral, it was the crown jewel of the Velari Medical Concord, a civilization that had not lost a patient in 300 standard years. Tonight, that record was about to break. Inside the central healing chamber, alarms sang in a soft, almost apologetic tone. The Velari did not believe in harsh sounds, even during catastrophe. But the chamber's silver-robed physicians were anything but calm. They moved in tight, frantic orbits around a floating crystalline cradle, their long, four-fingered hands trembling as they manipulated streams of light only they could see. In the cradle lay matriarch Veshelin, the spiritual and political heart of the Concord. Her skin, normally the soft lavender of a dawn nebula, had gone the color of old ash. A single wound ran across her abdomen, not large, not deep by Velari standards. It should have closed in seconds. Their nanotech could regrow a severed limb in under a minute. They had cured diseases that had not yet evolved. And yet, the wound would not close. "Resequence the synth flesh," whispered Healer Prime Onathar, his 3 eyes flickering between gold and panicked red. "Try the 7th harmonic, then the 9th. The young apprentice beside him, Tilly, obeyed with shaking hands. A shimmer of silver mist descended onto the matriarch's body. For a heartbeat, the wound seemed to knit. Then the flesh rippled, rejected the nanites, and split open again, wider this time. A thin trickle of indigo blood escaped onto the cradle. A junior healer fainted. 2 more turned away. "It's adaptive," Onathar breathed. His voice was the voice of a god discovering he could die. "The wound is learning our technology. Every attempt teaches it how to resist the next. Then we use older methods," Tilly said. "The bioweave, the plasma seal. We have tried them all." Onathar's hands fell to his sides. For the first time in his 800-year career, he did not know what to do. "Every method we have invented in 10,000 years, every one." The chamber fell into a silence so heavy it seemed to bend the light. Outside the great curved windows, the Hellion Reach turned slowly, indifferent. Tilly's eyes, wide, young, only 1 century old, drifted across the gathered healers. The greatest medical minds in the known galaxy. Frozen, useless. "Then," she said, and her voice was barely a breath, "we ask outside the Concord." Onathar turned toward her sharply. "There is no outside the Concord. We are medicine." "There are others," Tilly insisted. "Worlds we have catalogued but never consulted. The Concord Registry lists 312 sapient species with surgical traditions. Some of them," she swallowed, "some of them still use physical contact to heal." A ripple of disgust passed through the room. Physical contact, tools, touching open flesh with one's own hands. It was the stuff of horror stories told to Velari children. But the matriarch was dying. Onathar closed his eyes. When he opened them, they were the dull bronze of resignation. "Send the distress call, wide spectrum, anyone within 2 parsecs. Healer Prime, the nearest registered species is—" "I know what they are." His voice cracked. "Send it anyway." Tilly moved to the console, her hearts hammering against her chest plates. She keyed in the emergency frequency, the one no Velari had ever used in living memory. Her fingers hesitated above the transmit rune. "Healer Prime," she said. "The closest signal answer is from a human vessel." A collective shudder ran through the chamber. Humans, the galaxy's roughest species, the ones who fought wars with chemical projectiles and wore the bones of their dead as trophies, according to half the rumors. The Concord had only granted them observer status 6 years ago, and even that had been controversial. Onathar stared at the dying matriarch, at the wound that mocked 10,000 years of his people's brilliance. "Send it," he whispered. The transmission left the Lumenvesk in a thread of blue light, racing across the dark, carrying with it the unthinkable confession of a god-tier civilization. "We do not know how to save her. Please come." And somewhere in the cold black between stars, a small, scarred Earthship turned toward the signal and answered. "Part 2, the primitive arrives." The Earthship was called the Steady Hand, and it looked exactly like its name suggested, small, scarred, and unbothered. Its hull bore the dents of a dozen rough landings and the burn marks of one bad firefight near Ceres. When it docked against the gleaming flank of the Lumen Veshk, the contrast was almost obscene. A knife laid against a swan. The Velari honor guard assembled at the airlock in their ceremonial silvers, lined up in the crescent formation reserved for visiting dignitaries. Healer Prime Onathar stood at the center, his 3 eyes fixed on the slowly cycling door. Tilly stood behind him, fighting the urge to fidget. "Remember," Onathar murmured, "they are guests. They are also our last hope. Whatever they look like, whatever they smell like, you will show no reaction." The door hissed open. A single figure stepped through. She was shorter than any of them by half a meter. Her skin was the color of warm clay, her hair the color of dark wood, pulled back in a tight, practical knot. She wore a faded olive-green uniform with a red cross stitched onto one shoulder, hand-stitched, the Velari noted with a flicker of unease. Her boots were scuffed. A satchel hung at her hip, bulging with shapes none of them could identify. She had 2 eyes, only 2. It made her face look strangely flat, like an unfinished sculpture. "Corporal Elena Vashik," she said, voice level. "Field Medic, 14th Expeditionary, I got your distress call. You said it was urgent." Onathar inclined his long neck. "You came alone." "Crew's on standby. You said 1 patient. I don't bring a parade for 1 patient." Tilly blinked. The humans she'd read about were supposed to be loud, aggressive, perpetually on the verge of violence. This one stood as still as stone, and her eyes, those flat, 2-dimensional eyes, were doing something unsettling. They were measuring the room, the exits, the guards, the Healer Prime's stance, all in the space of 3 breaths. "Follow me," Onathar said. "There is no time for ceremony." "Good. I hate ceremony." They moved through the corridors of the Lumen Veshk at a near run. Velari healers and attendants pressed themselves against the curved walls as the procession passed, staring openly at the human in their midst. Some covered their mouths. One young initiate let out a small, involuntary squeak. Elena did not appear to notice. Or if she did not care. "Tell me about the patient," she said. Onathar spoke as they walked. He explained the matriarch, the wound, the nanotech. The way the injury seemed to learn, to adapt, to mock every solution they threw at it. Elena listened without interrupting. Her face did not change. When he finished, she said only 1 word. "Cause." "Unknown. An accident in the meditation gardens." She fell against a ceremonial blade. Elena's mouth tightened, just slightly. Tilly caught it, a micro-expression that the apprentice's training in xenophysiology told her meant, "I do not believe you, but I will ask later." They reached the healing chamber. The doors melted open. Elena Vashik stepped inside and saw the matriarch. For the first time, something cracked across the human's face. Not horror, not disgust, something older, something Tilly had no word for. It looked like recognition. "How long has she been like this?" Elena asked, already moving toward the cradle. The honor guard tensed. She ignored them and went to the matriarch's side as if she had every right to be there. 6 hours, 23 minutes, Onathar said. "Pulse! 41 beats, falling." Elena pulled a small light from her satchel, a primitive thing, a tube with a glass end, and clicked it on. White light. She bent over the wound. The Velari healers behind her made small, distressed sounds as her bare hand hovered over the matriarch's exposed flesh. She did not touch yet. She only looked. For a long, long moment, she was perfectly still. Then she straightened. "Your machines can't fix this," she said, "because the wound is contaminated with something that's hijacking the nanites. Every time you send them in, they get reprogrammed and turn into the problem. Am I right?" Onathar's 3 eyes widened. "We had begun to suspect this." "Yeah, thought so." Elena set down her satchel and began unrolling it on the floor, a dark cloth lined with pockets. From the pockets she drew out things the Velari had only seen in their oldest history archives. A small curved piece of metal, a spool of thin black thread, a bottle of clear liquid, a pair of thin gloves. The chamber went absolutely silent. "What," whispered Onathar, "is that?" Elena Vashik looked up. Her 2 flat human eyes were perfectly steady. "That," she said, is a needle. She threaded it, and I'm going to use it to save your queen. Part 3, Needle and Thread. The needle caught the chamber's soft light and turned it into a single bright point. Every Velari in the room stared at that point as though it were a new, malevolent star. Elena Vashik snapped on the thin gloves with a practiced motion. She uncorked the bottle of clear liquid antiseptic, simple ethanol-based, the kind every Earth medic carried, and poured it generously over her gloved hands, then over the needle, then over the area around the matriarch's wound. The Velari healers flinched as the liquid touched their leader's sacred skin. "It's just alcohol," Elena said, not looking up. "It kills microbes. Your nanites do the same thing, just fancier. Right now fancier isn't working, so we go old school." "You will cut her further," one of the senior healers whispered, horrified. "No, I'm going to close what's already open." Elena's voice was calm, almost gentle. "The nanites can't bond because something's interfering, so I'm going to bypass the chemistry entirely and use mechanics. 2 edges of flesh, pull them together, hold them with thread until her own body can take over." "Her body has not been asked to heal itself in centuries," Onathar said softly. "We always helped." Elena paused. For the first time, she looked up at the healer prime, really looked at him. Her flat human eyes softened a fraction. "Then it's about time you let her remember how." She bent over the wound. Tilly would replay the next 40 minutes in her mind, for the rest of her life. The human worked with a quiet, total focus. Her hands moved like she had done this 1,000 times, and from the calluses on her fingers she had. The needle dipped into the matriarch's flesh with a gentleness no one in the chamber had expected. In, across, out, pull, knot, cut, in, across, out. Each stitch was a small, deliberate act of architecture. The Velari watched in a silence so deep it felt religious. This was the species they had pitied. The species they had almost not invited into the galactic community because they were too primitive, too physical, too rough. And here was one of them, performing surgery with 2 flat eyes and 10 clumsy fingers and a piece of curved metal, doing what every healer in the Conquered had failed to do. Halfway through, the matriarch's breathing changed. It was subtle, a deeper draw, a longer exhale. Onathar's 3 eyes flooded with gold. "Her oxygen uptake is rising," he whispered. "Her pulse is stabilizing." "Yeah," Elena said, never breaking rhythm. "Once you stop the bleeding mechanically, the body remembers the rest. She's strong. Whatever she is, she's strong. She is a matriarch of the Conquered. Then she's been carrying a lot of people for a long time. Bodies like that don't quit easy." She set the final stitch, tied it, snipped the thread with a small pair of scissors that drew an audible gasp from the gathered healers who had never seen any blade so small and so casual. Elena straightened. She rolled her shoulders. There was sweat on her brow, but her hands were perfectly steady. "She'll need monitoring for the next 12 hours, she said. "Watch for fever. The stitches come out in 8 to 10 days, depending on her healing rate, which I'm guessing is faster than ours. Keep the area clean. No nanites near the wound for at least a full cycle. Let her own immune system do its job. It'll remember how, I promise." She peeled off her gloves. Onathar stared at the closed wound on his matriarch's body. A thin, neat line of dark thread held her flesh together, primitive, visible, almost ugly by Velari standards. And yet beneath it, color was returning to her skin. The ash gray was retreating. A faint lavender glow was beginning to pulse again at her temples. She was going to live. The healer prime, 800 years old, master of 1,000 healing arts, leader of the most advanced medical civilization in the known galaxy, slowly lowered himself to one knee. The entire chamber followed. Elena Vashik blinked. "Oh no, please, you don't have to." "We do," Onathar said. His voice trembled. "We absolutely do." Tilly knelt with the rest, her young hearts pounding. She watched the human stand awkwardly in the middle of the kneeling chamber, scratching the back of her neck like she'd rather be anywhere else, and Tilly thought, "The galaxy has been wrong about them. The galaxy has been so very wrong." Elena cleared her throat. "Look, I'm glad she's okay, but I need to say something, and I need to say it now while she's still vulnerable." Onathar lifted his head. "Speak!" Elena's eyes had gone hard again. The medic was gone. Something else was in her place, something Tilly did not yet have a name for. That wound wasn't an accident, Elena said quietly. Somebody made sure your nanites couldn't fix it. Somebody who knew exactly how your tech works. The chamber went cold. Healer Prime, Elena said. Your matriarch didn't fall on a blade. Then what? Somebody on this ship is trying to kill her. Part 4, The Saboteur. The words landed in the chamber like stones dropped into still water. The ripples spread outward through the kneeling healers, through the honor guard, through the silver-robed attendants standing frozen at the doorway. Anathar rose slowly. That is a grave accusation, Corporal Vashik. It's not an accusation, it's an observation. Elena gestured at the small, glistening tools she had laid aside. I pulled 3 particles out of that wound while I was stitching. They weren't tissue, they weren't blood, they were synthetic engineered, designed to read your nanite signature and feed it false bonding instructions. That's not something that grows on a ceremonial blade, that's something somebody put there. She held up a small, clear vial. Inside it, 3 flecks of metallic dust shimmered faintly. Anathar stared at the vial. His 3 eyes drained from gold to a sick, oxidized green. Show me, he whispered. Elena handed him the vial. He turned it slowly in his long fingers, and his shoulders sagged the way only the shoulders of a very old being can sag, under the weight of something they had refused until this moment to believe. There has not been a political assassination attempt in the Concord, he said, in 912 years. Congratulations on the streak, Elena said. It's over. Tilly's mind raced. The meditation gardens, the ceremonial blade, who had been with the matriarch that morning? The list was small, the matriarch's inner circle, 3 senior healers, 2 political envoys, and a sound came from the doorway. Soft, almost too soft to notice, the faint, electronic chime of a sealed comm channel being opened. Elena's head snapped up. So did Tilly's. One of the silver-robed attendants near the door, a tall, slender Velari named Corneth, the matriarch's own personal aide of 40 years, was speaking very quietly into a wrist piece. His eyes were fixed on Elena. They were not gold. They were not bronze. They were the flat, empty black of a being whose plan had just collapsed. He's calling someone, Elena said. Corneth's hand moved. It was not a fast movement by human standards. But the Velari were not built for combat, and none of them saw it coming. From within his silver robe, Corneth produced a slender silver tube, an emergency medical injector, the kind every senior attendant carried, and turned it not toward Elena, but toward the cradle, toward the matriarch. He was going to finish the job. Elena moved. The Velari would speak of it for years afterward. The way the human crossed the chamber in 3 impossibly economical steps, the way her shoulder drove into Corneth's ribs, the way her hand caught his wrist and bent it backward until the injector clattered to the floor. There was no flourish. There was no battle cry. There was only a small, hard-bodied medic doing what medics on 100 Earth battlefields had done for centuries. Keep the patient alive by any means available. Corneth hissed and twisted. He was taller than her, and his long limbs had reach. But Elena had been trained by drill sergeants who believed in leverage above all things. She drove her elbow into the soft place beneath his second heart, and he folded. Restrain him, Anathar barked, and finally the honor guard remembered they had bodies. They surged forward and pinned Corneth to the floor. Elena stepped back. She was breathing hard. Her left sleeve was torn. Corneth had managed to scratch her with something during the struggle. A thin red line ran along her forearm. She stared at it. Healer Prime, she said very quietly. Was there anything on his fingernails? Anathar's 3 eyes went wide. He lunged for the fallen injector and held it under the chamber's analyzer. A holographic readout bloomed above it in a cascade of Velari script. Tilly read it before he did, and her heart stopped. It's the same compound, Tilly whispered. The same compound that was in the matriarch's wound. Elena looked down at the scratch on her arm. The skin around it was already beginning to pucker, to redden, to refuse to clot. Well, she said, her voice was admirably even. That's inconvenient. Anathar wheeled toward the healers. Prepare a containment field. Synth flesh, harmonic 7 now. No, Elena said. What? Won't work on me either. The compound learns. It'll just adapt to whatever you throw at it, same as it did to her. She looked up at him, and her flat human eyes were calm in a way that frightened Tilly more than anything had so far. Get me to my ship. I have what I need on the steady hand. Real bandages, real sutures, antibiotics that don't run on nanotech. You cannot leave the chamber. Cornith was not alone. Assassins of his caliber never are. There will be others on this ship. Then we move fast. Elena's eyes flicked to Tilly. Apprentice, you're with me. Tilly's mouth fell open. Me! You're the only one in this room who looked at me like I was a person and not a curiosity. I trust that. Come on. Anathar caught Elena's good arm. Corporal, thank you. For her, for us. Thank me when I'm still alive in an hour, Elena said. She picked up her satchel. She slung it over her shoulder. The cut on her forearm was already weeping a dark, slow trickle, and together, the human medic, bleeding from a wound her own kind could heal but theirs could not, and the young Velari apprentice who had asked the unthinkable question. They slipped out of the chamber into the white halls of the Lumenveshk, where somewhere in the gleaming silence more knives were waiting. Part 5, Hunted in the White Halls. The Lumenveshk had been designed for serenity, not pursuit. Its corridors curved in gentle, organic spirals, its lights pulsed with the slow rhythm of meditation. There were no sharp angles to hide behind, no alcoves, no service ducts a human could fit into. Every surface was open, every line was long, and every footstep echoed. It was, Elena Vashik thought grimly, the worst possible place to be hunted in. Faster, she murmured to Tilly. Smaller steps. Stay against the inner curve. Assassins coming the other way will see your silhouette later that way. How do you know this? Because I've done it before. Move. Tilly moved. Her four-fingered hands were trembling, but her long legs carried her forward with surprising speed. Every few meters, Elena pressed her back against the wall and listened. The cut on her forearm throbbed. She had bound it tight with a strip torn from her undershirt, a temporary fix. The compound was already in her bloodstream. She could feel it, a faint cold weight moving through her veins, looking for somewhere to settle. 20 minutes, maybe 30 if she was lucky. Then she would start to slow down. Elena, Tilly whispered, the docking bay is 4 levels up. We will have to pass through the central atrium. It is open, fully visible from 6 approach corridors. Of course it is, Elena exhaled. All right, different plan. Where's the nearest medical supply station? 2 corridors east, but it will only have conquered supplies. Nanotech, none of which. I don't need their meds. I need their tools. Take me there. They ran. The medical station was small, white, and beautifully ordered, every drawer labeled in flowing Velari script. Elena began pulling them open one by one. Her left hand was starting to tingle now. Bad sign. What are we looking for? Tilly asked. Anything sharp, anything heavy, anything that holds a charge. Elena yanked open a drawer of long crystalline scalpels. These, yes, and there, that cauterizer, bring it. Elena, these are healing implements. On Earth, Elena said quietly, we have a saying. The same hands that close a wound can open one. Healers fight too when they have to. Tilly stared at her for a long moment. Then she gathered the tools. They had just stepped back into the corridor when the lights died. All of them, every soft pulse, every meditation glow. The Lumenveshk dropped into a darkness so complete that for a heartbeat Tilly could not tell which way was up. She heard Elena's voice in the black, low and steady. They cut the lights to take away your eyes. They forgot I only have 2 anyway. Elena's hand found hers. Pressed something cold and rod-shaped into her palm. Cauterizer, hold it like you'd hold a stylus. If anything comes at you and it isn't me, press the button on the side and shove it into them. Don't think, just do it. I have never. I know. That's why I'm telling you now. Footsteps, soft, multiple, coming from 2 directions. Elena's voice dropped to a breath against Tilly's ear. On three, we run, not toward the docking bay, toward the atrium. They'll expect us to hide. We don't hide. We go where the witnesses are. There are no witnesses. The corridors are empty. Not for long. Elena reached up. Tilly could feel the motion in the dark and slammed the butt of a scalpel into a panel beside them. A high, ringing alarm began to wail. Emergency lighting flickered on in soft red pulses. All across the Lumen Veshk, doors began to open. Healers, attendants, initiates, hundreds of them emerged into corridors, blinking, confused. Now there are witnesses, Elena said. Run! They ran! The two assassins came at them in the half-light of the atrium, silver robes, faces masked, long Velari blades drawn. The first lunged at Elena. She was slower than she had been an hour ago. The compound was eating at her reflexes. But she had spent 12 years on hard worlds, and her body knew tricks her mind no longer needed to think about. She dropped under his swing, came up inside his guard, drove the cauterizer into the soft place under his jaw and pressed the button. He went down without a sound. The second one turned toward Tilly. For one frozen second, the apprentice saw her own death in the angle of a stranger's blade. Then she remembered Elena's words, "Don't think, just do." And she lunged forward and shoved the second cauterizer into the assassin's chest with all the force of a century of careful, gentle hands, suddenly remembering they could be something else. The assassin crumpled. Tilly stood over the fallen body, shaking violently. "Good," Elena said, breathing hard. "That's good. Breathe, you're okay." Around them, the gathered Velari were staring at the bodies, at the masked faces, at the human medic swaying slightly on her feet. Word would spread now. The whole ship would know. Whatever conspiracy Corneth had been part of, it could no longer move in shadow. But Elena's knees were starting to buckle. "Docking bay," she rasped. "Tilly, get me to my ship." Tilly caught her under the arm. The young Velari was crying, silver tears down a lavender face, but her grip was steady. "I have you," she said. "Healer Vashik, I have you." Elena managed a thin, crooked smile. "Healer, huh? Big upgrade from primitive." She made it 3 more steps before the doc took her. Part 6. The Stitch That Held a Galaxy. Elena Vashik woke to soft light and the smell of her own ship. She was lying on the medical bunk of the Steady Hand, her own familiar gray ceiling above her, the faint hum of her own engines beneath her. Her left forearm was wrapped in a clean earth issue bandage. Beside the bunk, slumped in the small chair that was definitely not built for Velari proportions, was Tilly, fast asleep, 4-fingered hands folded in her lap. Elena's throat was dry. She croaked, "Hey, kid!" Tilly jolted upright so fast she nearly fell off the chair. Her 3 eyes flooded gold. "You are awake! You are awake! Healer Prime, she is awake!" "Easy, easy! What's the situation?" "You have been unconscious for 16 hours. I administered the earth antibiotics from your medical locker as you instructed me before you collapsed. I followed your written notes. I hope I did it correctly." "You did it perfectly," Elena said, looking at the neat, even bandage. "Better than perfectly. You've got good hands, Tilly." The apprentice's lavender skin flushed a deep, embarrassed violet. The hatch chimed. Onathar entered, ducking his long neck, 3 eyes brimming with something between gratitude and grief. He went to one knee beside the bunk again, and this time Elena did not protest. "The matriarch lives," he said. "Her wound continues to close on its own. She has begun to speak. She has asked for you by name. And the others? Corneth has confessed. He was part of a faction within the conquered, old families who believed the matriarch was opening our borders too quickly. They feared what would happen if lesser species were treated as equals." His 3 eyes lowered. "They engineered the compound specifically to defeat our nanotech. They believed no civilization would be able to save her. They believed they were untouchable. They didn't account for stitches," Elena said. "They did not account for humans." A long silence. "Corporal Vashik," Onathar said, "the matriarch wishes to grant you the Conquered's highest honor. She wishes to name you Healer Outside the Veil, a title given only twice in our history, both times to Velari saints. She wishes—" "I'm a corporal," Elena interrupted gently. I patch people up. That's what I do. I don't need a title. Then, what do you need? Elena thought about it. She looked at Tilly, at the young apprentice who had run through the dark with her, who had cried over a fallen stranger, who had bandaged a human with hands that had never touched human skin before yesterday. Take her on as a real student, Elena said. Teach her both ways, the new ways and the old ones. She has the instinct for it. She'll be a better healer than any of us. Onathar's 3 eyes turned to Tilly. The apprentice had gone very, very still. It would be, he said slowly, a profound break with tradition. Yeah, Elena said, but your tradition almost got your queen killed. Maybe a little break is overdue. Onathar bowed his long neck. It will be done. Tilly made a small, choked sound that was half a sob and half a laugh. 3 days later, the steady hand undocked from the Lumenveshk and turned its scarred nose back toward Earth. Elena Vashik stood at the viewport and watched the great pearl ship recede into the violet currents of the Hellion Reach. In her pocket was a small object Tilly had pressed into her hand at parting, a single Velari thread, woven from the silver fibers of the matriarch's own ceremonial robe, knotted in the human style. A stitch made by a Velari, for a human, the first one ever, in the long history of either species. The story, of course, did not stay quiet. It traveled first through the conquered, then through the trading lanes, then through every diplomatic channel in the known galaxy. Did you hear? The species said to one another. The Velari nearly lost their matriarch. Their machines failed. And then a human, closed the wound with a piece of metal and a piece of string. Some laughed at first. Then they stopped laughing, because the implication was clear, and it was terrible, and it was wonderful. The humans were not behind. The humans had never been behind. The humans had simply kept what the rest of the galaxy had thrown away in its rush toward perfection: the old skills, the rough hands, the willingness to touch a wound directly, the stubborn knowledge that sometimes the simplest tool is the one that works when nothing else will. When your gods fail, the saying began to spread, call a human. And in a small medical bay aboard the flagship of the most advanced healing civilization in the galaxy, a young Velari apprentice named Tilly sat down each morning and practiced, with trembling four-fingered hands, the careful, ancient art of pulling 2 edges of flesh together with a needle and thread. She was not very good at it yet, but she would be. She had been taught by the best.